Hi, and welcome to the Seamless Blend, digital textile dialogues with Gabby and Jorgen. Our primary purpose is to educate and initiate discussions. The opinions expressed are solely our own and do not constitute professional advice or services. We invite contributions from our audience and maintain an open community on Discord.
Hello. Welcome to episode 3 in season 2 of the Seamless Blend. Our episode this week is called To Test or Not to Test, specifically focusing on the physics of testing materials, and is that the missing piece of the puzzle? So we're going to discuss that between myself and Jorgen today. Quick intros. My name is Gabby Shiner-Hill. I am the co-founder of Bureau 555 and also an academic. I specialise in digital materials, and handing over to Jorgen.
Yes, so I'm Jorgen. I come from, the textiles manufacturing space and been based in Hong Kong for 10 years and working with textiles manufacturing companies. And now I'm currently working with Bandicoot Imaging Sciences, focusing on 3D or fabric digitization technology. So we have this new format that we started since the last season, and this is episode 3, so we've already gotten started with it. But just to kind of quickly recap that, what we're doing in this season is we're doing this shorter, kind of roughly 15 to 20-minute discussions, and we're talking a little bit more about what's been coming across our desks and what's been coming across your desk recently, Gabby.
Quite a few things. September, everyone's woken up. First of all, I just wanted to say I'm enjoying this new format as well. It's quite newsy and updatey, so thank you very much. So this week we are looking at the opening, or the beginning of the opening, of the Arts University Bournemouth Scanning Centre that we're doing with the Innovation Studio. So I've been working with Penelope Norman, who works at Arts University of Bournemouth. She's also was head of the MA Digital Fashion course. And she's been seconded into the Innovation Studio to bring fashion and textiles into that space. They've got a massive testing lab already. They've got virtual looms. They've got testing for different types of more scientific testing of materials, almost like, thread identification and that kind of idea. And Penelope and I have been talking for about 9 months now to set up within the Innovation Studio, a scanning and a testing lab. So that is due to open in the next couple of weeks. Everything is on site, which is very exciting. We've got Visu scanner. We've got a strength tester for the elongation. We've got Shirley stiffness tester for bending, weight, thickness. They've gone in with a few other pieces of machinery as well, because they were like, well, if we're going to go in on this, we're going to go hard on the fabric testing, which is brilliant. They've also got Clo already, they've got Browseware, they've got a fabric analyzer tester. So they're really trying to widen the scope of what they can offer as a digital materials lab. And Bureau is going to be working with them really closely to help set them up and train them and get them working. We will be having master students working on that as well, and some of their actual technical tutors working in the lab. That is really exciting, but it opens up, I think, a really interesting conundrum around where is the physics testing of materials needed within 3D design and development. And just really quickly to recap, if we're thinking about digital materials, we have the visual material, which is scanned. So that's using a scanner, and that's a visual material that's made up of a layer cake of maps, which make it look correct, which make it reflect light and have the depth and the height we're expecting of the material. But if we want that material to move, to drape, and to behave the way we would expect it to, and respond to gravity the way we'd expect it to in a physical environment, we then have to test the physics of that material. I was horrified when I found out we were going to have to test the physics of material 4 years ago, but that's the reality of where we are. But then I thought, well, you know what, it's fine, we can test the physics because we test materials all the time anyway. Every material that goes into production with a test report. There's going to be, testing is part of our blood within textiles. So I wasn't too phased until I realized the testing we're doing in the labs is not the same testing that the 3D softwares require. So that's the fun space we're in, basically. And over the last 3 years or so, we've sort of looked at where it's it's probably not realistic to test materials at the very beginning. It's time consuming, right? It could be up to 30 to 40 minutes extra time to test the material. So if you put that on every single material and you're doing thousands, it's maybe not 100% realistic to test every single material. So when is the optimum point to start testing? When can that testing information be delivered in? Or should we even be testing all these materials? Could we just have a database? Vizu has PhysX. Could we have a database that we draw that material down from? Could we prepare the approximate information for designers to work from? So we've looked at lots of different ideas around it. What test reports do we need? Could we design, for example, in a grant we designed just a test report for 3D softwares, which you add on to your standard test report to make it a little bit less scary. Don't scare the testing labs. That's kind of what's happening with me, and we're really looking into physics. We're looking into when we should test, how we should test, and how we can make it quick and scalable. So that's my side, and I'd be interested to know what's happening with you. What's come across your desk?
Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, I think we've both been a little bit in the same headspace, or in a similar headspace. I think for me, it's very much also almost like taking a step back even from where you were, since I've been focusing very much on the fabric digitization and the appearance element, and of course, in that process of bringing better apparent scanning, or more flexible or more scalable solutions, and kind of solving a lot of problems or initial challenges we've had with digitizing the appearance of the material, we're also looking at how different categories or different industries within textiles are also moving into 3D and DPC. And so, for example, one of the things we've seen is home textiles and furnishing fabrics. They can digitize their fabrics in the same ways that we've talked about a lot in season 1, and you've mentioned some already. Often home textiles have large pattern repeats, and so we've kind of really been able to work quite closely with a few home textiles and furnishing brands or textile manufacturers with Bandicoot's technology. But then we're seeing, for example, with fashion, that one of the big blockers for fashion seems to be physics. And I think you've mentioned also, even in what you said, you've been working on in the last week and this past time, it sounds like quite a lot of equipment that you need to have. Like you mentioned, for example, with the university project, you had a Visu scanner, and then you mentioned a whole set of equipment thereafter that was primarily then physics equipment.
The equipment is not cheap, let's say, and it's off the shelf, but it's you can be looking at upwards of 10 or 20,000 for some of these pieces of machinery. So that's maybe not necessary to have right in your office straight away. And we can look at the 3D software companies who've provided their own solution to physics scanning physics testing within their space. So you might have the Browseware fabric analyzer, you might have the Clay fabric testing kit, you might have the Optitex setup where they have essentially a little mini testing lab ready to go. So if you've invested in that hardware and equipment for testing to deliver into that piece of software, you're not immediately wanting that information can't necessarily be shared to other 3D software straight away. What if we want to test in Clo and test once and then convert to Browseware, right? What should we be stopped from doing that? Because actually, working in the digital world, technology companies may not want to hear it, but we like a bit of open source, don't we? We like to share information. We like a universal file format. Is there a reason to say that we can't share this information, batch process? If you've tested all for one software, could you not just test for another one as well, or flip it over? Slightly provocative question, but I think it's really important to discuss.
Yeah, no, I think in particular you mentioned, universal file format, or even you mentioned the equipment at the moment right now. For those that don't know, that might be listening, you need, if you're using Clo 3D has a physics kit that you can then get from them, and you can capture physics data in a format that works for Clo. You can do the same thing with Browseware. You can buy get the fab analyzer from Browseware, which is a little bit more of a machine looking device, and then you get some form of data out of that goes into Browseware, and that data isn't the same. I guess first of all, you're capturing the data of let's say the physics data across these different parameters or different elements of almost capturing the physics of the material. But then the data that comes out of these different testing methods are different. So could we, for example, in a universal file format, convert more of that data maybe across these different, to these different softwares like Clo and Browseware or Style3D or whichever software you're using? And of course, maybe could there be maybe a universal device that could capture physics in a more universal file format? And then, of course, we have to consider the complexity of, the data is also going to go into a simulations, let's just call it a simulations engine within the 3D design tool, so that of course there's going to be some very smart technical people that's going to have to work out how that data translates into simulating and showing accurately, according to the real world and the real physics around us, how the material drapes and how that is actually shown in the 3D design software. So I think, this is so many questions. I think you already probably have some comment on that, Gabby.
I was just going to say, because it reminded me of the fact that obviously we can test to go into Clo or to go into Browseware, or you can test if you've got the Style3D, it can all go in. But obviously, if you then take your 3D clothing and take that into Blender, you might as well have none of that information comes through with it. It's just, it's a ghost, it's gone, poof, of smoke, gone. So it really does feel like there is a joined up conversation to be had, which can the technology companies have it with each other? Will there be pressure from the industry to say, we're in like a total, land grab race at this point to work out which piece of software we're going to go with? So it'll be interesting to see if that moves forward. I think of it a little bit like Microsoft Word and Google Docs, right? Do you remember when they never used to speak to each other and it was really, really painful? But now obviously they do. And still, if you do a PPTX into Google Slides, then suddenly your font's over to one side.
The formatting and things,
we just need it to be simpler and easier to be able to digitize these materials. And it could be that the solution ends up being that we've tested a lot of materials, therefore we can have an approximate database to move forward with until everyone works it out and the technology companies works it out in the background. Because we need to move forward, really, at the end of the day.
Yes. And I think that's happening for a few companies as well, that almost like, I was in Hong Kong 2 weeks ago, or two and 3 weeks ago, and I met with a number of large American and European retailers, and I got to kind of also understand a little bit more where these companies were in there, both with apparent and physics. And I think it is surprising to me, I heard a few of them mention, especially bigger companies, they said that, we have tested so many materials and we've done so much physics capture that we have a larger material physics data set that what you can, for example, what you can even get from some of the libraries, like Vizu has their physics database, Clo and Browseware, and usually the software will also provide a database. Now the brands are actually having their own larger databases that is also much more relevant to their materials already. And even some of them were saying for the first time, which was surprising to me, but in a positive way, was hearing that the brands were then saying, and the kind of 3D and DPC teams were saying, physics is actually not so much of a concern for us anymore, because we have very skilled technical kind of textiles people that can then grab some data from our existing data set, and then you can always go into the 3D design tool and you can tweak it a little bit. And again, this is not optimal, but it's interesting to hear, because I think where we started this conversation was also very much around, is physics, the big blocker? When I've been working a lot with home textiles and furnishing, physics doesn't really exist I think for a lot of, there's not really something we talk about. Also very much because, drape and fit and these kind of, more like design and product development considerations doesn't really require physics in that way. And so I think that now when we're looking at the same time, then looking at, okay, home textiles, furnishing could be moving ahead a lot quicker, or might be looking at some other blockers. But fashion, there is this like big red lamp. It seems a little bit like red, that physics is just such a hurdle. So a very interesting discussion.
I'm so pleased to hear that brands were saying that to you as well, because that's what's going to help us all move forward. If we don't have to be like testing every material, obviously that's not really where we want to be in 5 years' time. And actually, to reflect on that slightly and almost turn it on its head a little bit, when we're talking about testing for the fabric physics, we are talking about preparing a file on the computer that visually looks correct to us as designers, product developers, buyers, whoever we might be, that we can believe it, that it drapes, that it moves the way we expect that material to move on that product, and therefore we can make a rational decision about whether we move forward with it. So it's only testing for a visual outcome, right? It's not testing for any physical outcome.
Yes.
You mentioned Hong Kong. I've been to see AI Loop, who are out of Royal College of Art and Hong Kong Polytechnic University. That's their backers, and they're an early stage prototype, and they've tested about 100 materials, and they're looking at a completely new way of testing materials. So not testing the physics of the material so we can visualize it, but it's testing the physics of materials so we can understand, so our brains can understand what that material feels like. Is it hard? Is it soft? Is it scratchy? I don't know if itchy is an actual one, actually, but it's all about sort of like pressure and squishing. And they've got all these different indicators, and reading these indicators allows you to understand what that material feels like. So having that information alongside, without haptics currently, just so you know.
Yeah.
So alongside the actual physics testing to visualize it in 3D, it's then having a set of testing data that tells you how that material feels. But it's all about, it's all these different sliders, and they've got little emojis, and it works really well. Like, I read it and was like, my God, I really understand what that waffle weave would feel like. I do feel you may have to walk into it with a little bit of obviously inherent textile knowledge, but it's due to be, it is supposed to be delivered for designers who understand materials. So I'm really interested to see what they come up with, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they develop, definitely.
Yeah, I'm a alumni. I did my undergraduate in Hong Kong Polytechnic, so it's good to hear that they're doing some good work, and have I think a lot of focus on textiles, and I think a lot of exciting things also happening, in particular with Hong Kong Polytechnic, with Hong Kong RITA, and I think a lot more research and development and funding and exciting things happening around that. So very, very exciting to hear. And I think also with these, both the kind of organizations, with I think new innovation that's happening, I think we're going to see some, there's something will happen in the physics space, whether it's going to be a more open dialogue and conversation between the software developers, whether we'll get a universal file format, or like we're probably not going to just get it. I think we're part of a conversation. We're going to have to maybe create it, or work with someone in order to create it. And maybe, this is an interesting discussion, I think, is this almost like, the appearance versus physics, and maybe that's even something, maybe that requires an episode of its own. But I think, today we talked about physics being a big blocker, but there's a lot of work to be done in appearance, and they need to both move forward at the same time. And I heard something I just wanted to mention, and we can maybe come back to this later on as well, but someone that was talking about on how it's hard to say which one is actually most important. But between the two, we could say that appearance seems more important for maybe retail, for shoppers to be able to see that something looks good, but it's maybe not necessarily so much about the fit when you're in e-commerce and retail. And then physics is very important for DPC, for the digital product development and design and product development stages. So that's kind of like separating the two out. Yeah.
Flat lay of images, right? You're not really seeing the physics on a flat lay of an image on
exactly.
AN, other retailers' websites. So I think we'll have to see how that comes out in the wash slightly. Moving towards the end right now, what I would like to highlight to anyone who's in London, because we're looking at any kind of like early stage developments, we want to see all of these interesting technologies that are being developed all around the globe. But this weekend is Digital Design Weekend at the V&A, which is part of the London Design Festival. So that's at the Victoria and Albert Museum for anyone who's not London based. 20th, 21st and 22nd of September. And they've got around about 30, maybe even 40 different exhibitors from different universities, from different creative practices, looking at lots of different areas of digital design and digital art as well. There's an AI sewing project, which I'm going to go see. There's a hypercraft project, which I'm going to go see around care labels of the future and the internet. So I think there's lots of interesting stuff to be seen this weekend, and I will report back on it next week as well.
Looking forward to hearing more about that. We also have, we mentioned last time, we're going to mention it one last time this week because it's happening next week, is the 3D Tech Fest. The 3D Tech Fest is happening from the 24th to the 26th. It's open for everyone to join. Just Google 3D Tech Fest, and then you'll be able to sign up. There's going to be 3 days of online events talking, in similar things as we're talking about here, but in much more detail and with a lot more knowledgeable people. And both Gabby and I will be speaking in two separate occasions on the same day. So feel free to tune in there. And we're trying to do our best to keep these conversations short in this new format, and it's tough. There's so much to discuss, but that's everything for this week. So we'll I think we'll come back to some exciting conversations again next week based on everything that's happening in the next week.
Thanks,
see you all next week. All right.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Seamless Blend. If you enjoyed today's discussion, feel free to subscribe. We also invite you to connect with us and participate in our discussions on Discord. Let us know if you agree, disagree, or have any questions. Until next time, take care.